This is the web transcription service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. On the 1st of June 2017, the Institute held its 24th annual D-Day Dodgers Luncheon, commemorating Canadians who participated in the Italian campaign. The gathering was addressed by retired Lieutenant Colonel Adrian Praysner, former commanding officer of the Royal Regiment of Canada.
So let me just introduce Adrian Praysner.
Gary, thank you very much. Very kind remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us today. Gary mentioned the MCC. Many of you are in Borden in the 60s, which that's the Militia Training Center. It was actually based on a building that was referred to as the spider web. The spider web was in fact a military prison. And the reason I mention it is because the reason I have so many artifacts, I guess, is because my father has always been a bit of a kleptomaniac. I didn't realize. In fact, I'm now in the process of dismantling bookshelves at home that were made from the window bars from all the cells at the MTC. So if you're interested in a set of bars, please let me know and I'll be happy to pass them on. They deserve to go to some other shut-in friend, I think. If you don't mind, I'm going to start with the introductory slide here. The photograph that I took of a couple of items that were among my father's belongings. The flag, or the map that you see is a silk map. It came out of an escape and evasion kit that was issued to some of the platoon commanders, not all of them, but some of the platoon commanders, particularly those that had been regular force before the war broke out. And within that escape and evasion kit was this particular map of Europe, as well as benzodrine, morphine with a hypodermic, a small compass, small amounts of chocolate, and apparently there was gold, but the gold, oddly enough, went missing in action. As it turned out, apparently it was split up amongst his original platoon, and unfortunately I never got to have a look at it. But if you're familiar with that wonderful movie, How I Learned to Live with the Bomb, Dr. Strangelove, you'll recall, I believe it was Sam Pickens, as he was flying in on that last run into Russia, explaining that they all had their escape and evasion kits, and among the items there was gold, and then he went on to enumerate the prophylactics. Well, there were certainly no prophylactics in this kit, I can assure you. The other items, by the way, the compass most of you are familiar with, probably the compass with the strap or not. That was a standard German issue to the so-called Fallschirmjäger, the paratroopers. They ran into it actually in Sicily, or actually in Italy, and that one was relieved, taken away from the gentleman who kind of had no more need for it. The pistol, of course, is a standard issue Eddiefield, and the knife is unusual because it's what's known as an FS fighting knife, a Fairbanks and Sykes fighting knife. That's pattern 2. You'll see these on the market. You won't see a pattern 2. This is what was issued in Scotland. Now, Gary already spoke briefly about Lady Astor. And if you were wondering what she looked like, this is her in peak form. And, of course, the famous quote from Winston Churchill. As you can read for yourself, if you were my husband, I'd put poison in your tea. Oh, coffee. And of course, the proper response is, if you were my wife, I would drink it. And so there was no love lost between Lady Astor, who was originally an American, but who found herself in the UK, married to a very wealthy gentleman who gave her both title and leisure. There was certainly no love lost between the two of them. And there wasn't a great deal of love lost, obviously, between the D-Day Dodgers, so-called, as she coined it, and those that served in Italy. It's interesting, however, that recently her nephew has denied that she ever said that. And in fact, it's now claimed that there was a letter written to her by a British soldier who was somewhat disturbed that he hadn't been involved with the Normandy assault and had signed a D-Day Dodgers. So that's what's now being played. Sometimes, and perhaps before I talk to this slide, when Gary asked if I would like to speak at this luncheon, we talked about a particular subject, and that was Operation Gold Plate, which of course I'll speak to a little later on this afternoon. But it's always interesting that when you set out to address one subject, in your research you find that there are other messages and perhaps other stories that have to be told. And I'd like to think today that's the case, and if you indulge me, I'll try to bring out some of the points that I think are very important about what we're commemorating today. But what is very important, I think, as well, is to recognize the gentleman that started this particular luncheon, and that's the gentleman on the right. How many of you recognize him? Absolutely. It's Ted Brown. The gentleman on the left is my father, and in fact, in some respects, this is really the last slide that I should have showed, because this is when my father was dying out at Ortona Barracks, Central Command in Oakville. Many of you will remember when our headquarters was there, and at that particular time, Brigadier Brown was the commander. And I knew the both of them got along reasonably well, given the common, there were other reasons why they may have had some differences, but given their common background, they had a great deal of affection for one another. And I thought I'd like to just recognize Brigadier Brown, because it's a wonderful thing that he did, and I mean, something that's a tradition that we'd like to keep carrying on with. By the way, while I'm talking about Brigadier Brown, as you know, he was an artillery officer. And I have to apologize to Barry Downs, who has recently been made, I guess, the newest honorary lieutenant colonel of the artillery. So, Colonel, honorary colonel. So anyway, I'm sorry I wasn't there. So this is sort of the end, and as I said, if you'll indulge me, I'll go to the beginning. Oh yeah. So this is Whitefish Lake, Ontario, and that's Special Constable John Praysner. He was Special Constable for the OPP, and really desperately wanted to get into the RCMT. Unfortunately, that wasn't to be. And this, as you can see, is a cruising party. Of course, back then, cruising meant something a little different than it might mean to you today. And if you look at those gentlemen there, starting from the third from the left, maybe they're not the crew that you'd like to take a shower with. But many of it. Cruising, of course, is timber cruising. And where this particular picture was taken was well up the Agawam Canyon Railway. And it wasn't long after that John Praysner decided that he didn't want to be a special constable. He wasn't going to get into the Mounties. So his best choice, he thought, was to get into the Army. And he did. He came down to Toronto. And I don't know if you recognize where this is. How many people know where that might be?
C&E grounds?
Well done.
Yeah,
well done.
Can't remember the name of the barracks office.
Stanley Barracks.
Stanley Barracks.
How many folks are from Toronto or Southern Ontario? Just curious, if you don't mind. Pretty much everybody here. That's good, because this story is really about Southern Ontario and the 1st Infantry Brigade of the 1st Canadian Division. And they were made up of 3 units. The 48th Highlanders, or the Glamour Boys as they were called, the Royal Canadian Regiment, which was the regular force unit that had a company, Bravo Company, stationed at Stanley Barracks, which was right down at the CME. And if you remember the Marine Museum or the Maritime Museum, that's the original officers' quarters for Stanley Barracks. And of course, the 3rd unit was the Hastings and Prince Edward Regiment. So those are the 3 regiments, the infantry regiments, that essentially represent central Canada, they represent us, and they were right in this city at that time. Two very important units. A little better picture that gives you a side view of the Maritime Museum now, but then the officers' mess, or then the officers' barracks. I'm having a little, there we go. I wanted you to have a look at this because this isn't 1920, it's not 1930. These pictures were all taken in 1936, 1937. And if you notice on the lower right-hand side, or not quite the lower right-hand side, but the lower quadrant, it's a Vickers machine gun. That's the state of the art in 1935, 1937. On the upper left are the RCDs. And of course, the buglers are at that particular time practicing. But it's important to know that in those days, the RCDs, although they did have an armored car, and I'll show it to you in a moment, predominantly they were mounted. And in fact, my father, when he joined in the early, well, 1935, but in the early part of 1937, 38, they were still doing joint tactics, the infantry with cavalry. And it was considered to be a very smart move if you had two small soldiers and one trooper with a large mount, that both of them could hang from the stirrups when they did their attacks and assaults. The center top is Niagara-on-the-Lake. And many of you have probably been there, and some of you will even remember where Garrison Common was, and it's still there pretty much, hasn't been used for years, of course. And the lower left is 1938 era Canadian signals, complete with wicker baskets. The Army then was so, I'll say cheap, but the fact is poor, that if you wanted to transfer from Bravo Company to Alpha Company in London, you had to wait until summer concentration on Niagara-on-the-Lake and go down with your company and then go back with the new company. So if you wanted to go from Toronto to London, they would not pay your way on a train. You had to wait, go down during the summer, and then transfer at that time. Now we have some Armored Corps people here. I told you that they weren't only mounted. I'm sorry for the quality of the photo, but this is right then, and this is one of the two armored cars that they had access to. This is what the RCDs were using. Incidentally, this is what the Americans offered to send up. They had a number of Renault tanks. I think we took two of them. Again, 1937, 1938, and of course we didn't take the First World War area. This is what Germany was using in 1938. On the lower left, a heavy tank. Upper right, a scout car, heavily armored, considered very quiet, and a tank destroyer. So, one of the things that I want just to illustrate to folks is the significant difference between how the Canadians were equipped and what they were about to go into, and how the enemy was going to be facing them. And in some respects, I guess the message within this particular slide is we're going the same way again today. And I don't mean to be political about this, but the reality is that without proper funding, this is exactly what's going to happen. In one of my notes, which I'd be happy to share with you a little later on, but I won't go into detail right now, but in 1948, after the war was over, the Minister of Defense was questioned on things such as fusing, proper fusing for artillery shells. Everybody was, at that point, state of the art was for an airburst or a a super quick fuse, I guess it was being called, the MEPAR. But these fuses didn't even exist in the Canadian inventory in 1947. At some point during the war, we were using them from other sources, but our own sources we didn't have. So there were a number of problems with the equipment. So with that in mind, the 1st Canadian Division, made up of the 3 infantry brigade groups, mobilized. And as I mentioned before, 1st Brigade was made up of the Royal Canadian Regiment, the 48th Highlanders, and the Hastings and Prince Edward Regiment, and of course 1 company from the Lord Scots, which provided a ground defense capability. In 1939, in December, these were the 3 brigades that went over, and when they arrived in England, they arrived in Scotland, and immediately made their way south to an area in the south of Scotland, in the Sussex and Surrey and Hampshire area. Many of you would probably have visited it if you've been to England in the last 15 years, because Aldershot really hasn't changed. Aldershot, Borden, Reigate, Frensham Common, these were the areas where the Canadian military was immediately bivouacked in, and this is exactly where they stayed for a number of months of training. What isn't well known, though, is that, well, perhaps what is well known is that in early June, the 4th of June, the Germans had moved into France. And they moved rather rapidly, so rapidly, in fact, that they caused the evacuation of 338,000 British troops from the port of Dunkirk. And many of you may have seen films related to the little boats that went over to help with the evacuation. And in fact, I had an uncle that a great uncle that did, in fact, get into a little boat, but he didn't go to Dunkirk. He went to Brussels, or to Bruges rather, to Ostend, to a harbor to pick up another great aunt who refused to leave without bringing along her pet canary. And then he immediately came back over to Dunkirk, picked up three young British soldiers and brought them back to Dover. But the massive evacuation as a result of the enormous German attack on France and the speed of their blitzkrieg operation was considered a tremendous loss, even though Churchill at the time attempted to paint it as a positive success in getting so many troops off. The fact is, politically, it was extremely bad. What few Canadians know, though, is that on the 14th of June, at Brest, which I've indicated here, elements of the 1st Infantry Brigade Group landed and went inland. And they went inland about 200 kilometers, in fact, or rather 200 miles. The 48th Highlanders got as far as Le Mans, and the RCR got as far as Chateaubriand. And at the time that they arrived in Chateaubriand, which was just the evening of the 14th, early on the 15th, they discovered that on the 14th, the German army had marched into Paris. So if you look at the map, you can understand what a significant challenge that was for one infantry brigade, thinking that they were going to outflank the German army, equipped the way I showed you a few minutes ago, when they were still carrying Lewis guns and the occasional Vickers. So obviously it was a bit of a challenge, but nonetheless the Canadians showed a tremendous amount of mettle in taking that challenge and moving in rapidly, but they didn't stay very long. It didn't take them long to realize that they were clearly going to be in a lot of trouble if they stayed. And of course, chief among the problems they were going to face is the fact that shortly after the 14th, after the Germans marched into Paris, Vichy France was created. And they were essentially now in enemy territory. It was a significant problem for the RCR because they, at one of the train stops, as they tried to remove them or to withdraw to Brest, the train crew abandoned the train. And in fact, the engineer and the coalman walked off, in fact, rushed off rather rapidly, afraid that if they were caught with the Canadians, they would be considered traitors. It was rather fortunate that among the number of the RCR, there was a couple of guys that had actually run engines, and they got the train going, and they moved off and managed to evacuate Brest and get back to England. In the process, of course, they rather sadly, or depending upon your point of view, rather happily lost all of their equipment. The only equipment that was saved were the guns, and that was only as a result of a very quick thinking on behalf of one of the gunners. So the guns came back to England, but pretty much everything else stayed in France. So I think one of the stories within the story, to my way of thinking, is this incredible attitude of Canadian soldiers, the can-do attitude, regardless of what they're faced with, regardless of the problems that they have to contend with, and regardless of the hardships that they're dealing with. In spite of the poor equipment, they've had and always have demonstrated terrific leadership and a will to fight. Unfortunately, in this particular case, there wasn't much of a fight that they could give. I looked long and hard to try to find a picture of the 1st Infantry Brigade in Brest, and that's the only one I could find. And sitting in the lower left is John Praysner, Platoon Sergeant Major, surrounded by his platoon. And if you can find another photograph of their presence there, I'd very much like to see it. But I'm not sure who took the photograph. Maybe the same guy that took the picture of Henning or Tenzing on the top of Mount Everest. But nonetheless, somebody had a camera, which is usually not permitted, but a very interesting photograph nonetheless. I mentioned Platoon Sergeant Major. The RCR was the only battalion, the infantry battalion in the Canadian Forces, that actually had that rank. And it was a very short-lived rank. They were non-commissioned officers that commanded platoons. A good example, again, of just how much economy the military liked to apply to the infantry. When the brigade got back from Brest, there was an awful lot of head scratching, and one of the challenges that they faced was they had insufficient officers. They knew that in the action to come, that they would have to clearly grow, and they would have to basically bootstrap themselves to the proper strength to be able to face the enemy. And so what they established was OC2, the Officer Candidate Training Unit. And this was established in England. There had been an officer training unit proposed for Canada, but they were in such a hurry that they decided that they ought to have one right away, and they established it in Borden. What's relevant about the Officer Candidate Training Unit is that they picked from the NCO's ranks, and in the case of a couple of the regiments, in fact, they selected them by vote, and NCOs, some of the senior NCOs, picked those among them that they thought they would like to see lead them going into action. And this is the very first OC2 course. On the upper left, you'll see the passing out parade. In the upper right, the lower left, you'll see a gentleman, General McNaughton. And the chap he's speaking to there is John Praysner, who's just graduated as a top cadet, number 1 Octu. The relevance, of course, of being top cadet is that you get asked if you'll come back and teach. And so this is the 2nd Octu course, and the instructors are along the bottom. And I use the word bootstrap, but that's exactly what they were doing. They were taking the people that had some of an aptitude for learning what was required, and then using them to carry on training and training and training. And so we move on. Number 3, number 5. And I think this is the picture that incidentally may have Milton Gregg, lower right-hand side. So, Milton Gregg, of course, some of you may recall Milton Gregg. He was a VC winner from the First World War and an RCR officer, and he was asked to command Octu for a number of the serials. Well, after those serials were completed, the RCR, of course, had a lot of spare time on their hands, and one of the ways they took care of that was by making sure they had transport and getting around the countryside. Sorry, I shouldn't have gone ahead. I mentioned that they were co-located in an area not far from Aldershot, and of course, one of the problems that occurred towards the end of the war, when demobilization was occurring and the soldiers were trying to get home, was a riot. And the riot ended up in a number of people being thrown into the so-called glass house. And I remember an anecdote that my father told me about visiting the glass house that I've never forgotten, when one of his soldiers had been arrested and put into custody. And he said he knocked on the door, and when the door opened, a small window opened to see who he was was challenged, and explained that he was there to see one of the soldiers. And when he walked into a compound, there was a tremendous scurrying of feet as people ran, and he didn't know what was going on. And when he gathered his wits, he noticed that within the compound there were a number of MPs with red caps on, but all around the perimeter of the compound were soldiers with their hands over their eyes facing a wall. And he said, "Well, why is that?" And he said, "Well, sir," he said, "these men aren't considered fit to look upon an officer, and so as a result, part of the drill is when you come into this compound, they have to run and hide, and that's what they do." But he said when they got out, what was interesting is they generally got an immediate promotion on the basis that anybody that had been in probably wasn't going to commit another infraction. So, I want to take you into Operation Husky now, which of course you know is the beginning of the D-Day Dodgers action. Operation Husky was the invasion of Sicily. But what's really relevant about this invasion, and I think what probably galls so many of the members who participated in Operation Husky, was it was the greatest combined operations that have ever been attempted so far. The objective for the Mediterranean area was to knock Italy out of the war, and simply put, the direction was that they should contain the maximum number of German divisions. So the assumption and the conclusion was that they should immediately invade Sicily in order to get a foothold in Italy. And so while we talk about D-Day, and of course we understand anger of the D-Day Dodgers towards the attention that was given to the D-Day operations. Many people don't realize that there was over 3,000 ships involved in the Husky operation. There were 10,000 or 100,000, 160,000, 14,000 vehicles, 600 tanks, 1,800 guns. And very significantly for the Canadians, their convoy of 92 ships arrived in Sicily, off the coast of Sicily, having come directly from Scotland, where all the other ships had embarked from either North Africa, from the east of the west end of North Africa, where the Americans and the British were already stationed. So the result is that the coordination of getting both the Canadian task force, the British and the American aligned at the same time in order to accommodate the landing was extraordinary. It was also very dangerous. Unlike D-Day, as we know it for Normandy, what's not recognized is that the Mediterranean was not controlled by the British or the American Navy. And in fact, submarines were quite active. There were two convoys that left with the Canadian division, the 1st Canadian Division. The so-called fast convoy, which carried the troops, and then the slow convoy. The slow convoy carried predominantly the vehicles and equipment. 3 of the ships in the slow convoy were sunk. And there were, on one, 600 troops that were actually destined for reinforcement, and a number of those were lost at sea. So it obviously was a very challenging engagement, a very challenging undertaking, and one that I think people don't understand when they compare what happened with Operation Husky to the landings in Normandy. To be sure, the landings in Normandy had a much larger armada of ships, primarily because they needed the firepower to soften up the target. But the reality is that when you consider the great distance at which the Canadians and the British and Americans were operating, this is an extraordinary accomplishment. It was equally extraordinary.
This is the web transcription service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. This is the web transcription service of the Royal Canadian Military held its 24th annual Dodgers Month 2007 commemorating Canadian Institute held its 25th annual campaign. Dodgers. The gathering was addressed by retired Lieutenant Colonel Adrian the Italian campaign, former commanding officer. The gathering was addressed by retired Lieutenant Colonel Adrian Praysner, former commanding officer of the Royal Regiment of Canada.
Off their landing zone, and as a result, were badly injured, some lost at sea. So, an extraordinary undertaking, and again, favorably comparing to D-Day, and an undertaking that I don't think is fully understood or appreciated by many people that aren't familiar with Husky. Now, we've had speakers in the past that have done a very thorough job of going through the actual engagements in Sicily and in Italy. Briefly, the names that you'll hear, Minforte, Asoro, Adira, Regobuto, Adorno, Campobasso, where they landed, when they landed on the boot, Ortona, the valley. But what I think is important is to understand that all the way through, first of all, in the landing in Sicily, this was their first time in action. Other than the very short landing that we had in Dieppe, of which very little positive experience could be taken, the very sad defeat at Hong Kong, and an invasion at Spitsbergen, which was very short and really had very little in the way of opposition. This was the first time that the Canadians had actually engaged with the enemy. And so Sicily, occupied as it was by 2 divisions of German troops and a significant number of Italian troops, and I want to digress for a moment. It's very popular and very common for people to denigrate the quality of the Italian troops. And in some cases, perhaps that's well deserved. But the Alpini in particular were extremely well trained and very well qualified. And while we didn't run into them in Sicily, we certainly ran into a few of them, and the fascist group that was formed afterwards, after Mussolini was deposed, did oppose the Allies, and they were very tough troops to deal with. So, notwithstanding the limited opposition from the Italians in Sicily, there was still a consideration, and something that caused the Allied troops, the British, Canadian, and American, as they were advancing, some concern. The interesting thing about the Canadian activity going through Sicily is that the Americans were essentially on the west coast of Sicily, working their way up and around as they were attempting to. And the British were on the east coast, with the Canadians moving on their left flank. When the British got halted, and it became very, very soon, it was the direct result was that the Canadians were forced to push on a lot faster than they might otherwise have had to do, and they pushed on with an exposed flank. And this made the fighting very difficult. One of the more famous incidents, of course, that I think is a good example of the mettle of the Canadians is Mount of Sorrow. I know that John Newman and a number of folks have been to Sicily and visited Mount of Sorrow. But Mount of Sorrow commanded a very large area, and it was important as tactical ground that it be occupied, and the Hastings and Prince Edward Regiment climbed up a very challenging hill in order to hold the ground and also to use the observation that it provided and to direct fire against the enemy. Unfortunately, the Hastings and Prince Edward were essentially cut off from any resupply, and they were cut off for about 48 hours. As a result, the RCR, one of the companies, volunteered to go up with ammunition and rations, which they did in the middle of the night, literally under the noses of the Germans, and then managed to get back by 6 in the morning. But it's one of the examples of the difficulty and the tough going of Sicily that many people may not understand. Moving into Campobasso and moving north, the significance in Italy was, of course, the terrain, compounded by the fact that they were now up against a very, very determined enemy. And it was obvious, because they weren't entirely sure initially whether the Germans would decide to hold or withdraw. But it was quite obvious that Hitler had no intention of giving up any ground at all to the Allies. He had made a bit of a foolhardy claim when he kicked them off at Dunkirk, that they would never occupy Europe, and he was going to stand by that. And that's in fact what the Allies were counting on. It was absolutely critical that the Germans held their ground, because the objective, as I mentioned earlier, was to try to ensure that as many of the German military could be kept in Italy and prevented from joining in to oppose the attack on Normandy. And to that effect, what they did, the Germans, is set up a series of lines. The Hitler line, the Gothic line being the most northerly line and probably the most heavily defended, but a number of lines all the way up the boot. And at each of these lines, these defensive lines, they forced the Allies to deploy, and they forced them to take heavy casualties. The Allies, for their part, and the Canadians in particular, were very adept at managing to move rapidly up the flank, and they did. For the most part, the early part, they moved up on the eastern flank, up the Adriatic, until, of course, they were called down into the Liri Valley because of their success and the reputation that they had gained as shock troops, essentially. But The net result of the attack in Italy, or the Italian campaign, was that the Germans essentially kept approximately 35 divisions focused on the defense of Italy. At any one time, 25 of those divisions were calculated to be in action against the Allies. The question people should ask themselves is what might have happened if 20 of those divisions or 10 of those divisions had been able to be deployed to Calais, or had been deployed to any of the Normandy strong points in order to beef them up. And the answer, of course, this rhetorical question is D-Day would probably have failed. So the very, very significant activity. As a result of the Italian campaign, there were approximately 800,000 men tied up, both the Italian fascisti and German troops, tied up and prevented from engaging. And in fact, it's noteworthy that Kesselring actually brought a division from the Eastern Front, from the Russian front, into Italy in order to try to forestall, in this case, the Canadians after their breakout of Ortona and their advance towards Rimini. So the other thing that I think is also not understood is the amount of coordination that simply beggared what might have occurred anywhere else. The term United Nations was first coined in the Italian campaign, and as many may know, let me just read you a list of the Allied troops that were fighting through the Italian peninsula. American, Australian, Brazilian, British, Canadian, Czechoslovakian, Free French, Greece. The Greek military, in fact, fought into Rimini after the Canadians had begun the assault. They actually carried on and completed the assault. Indian Army, the Italian Resistance, the Italian Royal Army, New Zealand, Polish, South African, and even Syrian. In fact, there was a brigade, I forget now the name, the Israelis had a brigade. Does anybody remember? One of the free Israeli, well, there was a Free Palestinian Brigade was there, I think it was called. And they worked with the Canadians briefly. So the Italian campaign really allowed the D-Day operations to be successful for the Allies. And it was obvious as well that the Canadians had paid very, very dearly for it. This is an RCR cemetery. This is the one at Ortona. As you know, if you've been to the other cemeteries in Italy, this was not the permanent location. Well, this is the permanent location, but this is not the way it was to end up. But that's 1944. And on the left is an RCR officer, Major Pope. These are one of the markers that were put down as a result of the Operation Husky that occurred 2 years ago, and a number of volunteers decided to march through Sicily and put markers where all the Allied officers, all the Allied members had fallen. This is my father with his command group, not far from Anzio. If you read, you'll see KIA. Those were killed in action. W, those were wounded, MIA or missing in action. Pretty horrific when you consider that such a large percentage of the combatants were either wounded or in this case lost their lives. And this is completely common. The RCR lost the commanding officer within a week of landing in Sicily. Other units suffered the same fate. The picture on the left is my mother and father's wedding, and the best man is Jack Morgan, standing next to a great aunt of mine. By the way, that's the uncle that on the right-hand side. That's Hubert de Burgh that took him in that grave site on the right. So somewhere in the regimental history of the RCR, there's a note that said that the QM slips away, and the QM at that particular time was my father. It was on the 20th of February 1945. And there was a reason. And the reason was to be called Operation Goldflake. And the aim was to bring the maximum possible strength. And you may recall if you've read about, as many people have obviously, about Normandy, when the Allies started to move north, of course the Americans moved to the south, but the British and the Canadians started to move north. They ran into a tremendous amount of resistance. And Caen in particular was a very, very tough nut for them to break. And of course they tried to force their way north and through Calais, or up to Calais. It was clear to the high command, though, that they really had to break through quickly. And there were a number of concerns that they had, obviously. One was rapid advance of the Soviet forces, and the other one was the potential for the Germans to get back across the Rhine and to create their version of their fortress Europe at home. So they essentially directed that 3 Allied divisions from Allied armies in Canada in Italy be moved as quickly as possible. And of course, that immediately pointed its finger at the Canadians. And the result of that is Operation Goldflake. Which brought me to the other item that was sitting in that first photograph that we had up, and that's the top secret message that, quite by accident, I found in my father's belongings, which is what led me to maybe foolishly volunteer to Gary that I would talk today, because the intention was to talk about Goldflake, but as I mentioned earlier, so many other things became equally important, I thought, to talk about. So Operation Goldflake resulted in the so-called monumental task of moving 3 divisions into Northern Europe. But the challenge was to do it without the enemy knowing. And so as a result, what happened is that while they thinned out first the division that was in reserve, they also initiated a very, very sophisticated deception plan. And the plan was so effective by using rear troops to go around and change signs, by engage in radio traffic, pretending that they were operational units, Canadian units. The plan was so effective that while the Germans began to realize that the Canadians weren't in the line, they actually thought that they'd been withdrawn in order to prepare for a major assault. And in fact, one of our honorary colonels of the Royal Regiment of Canada, Sid Cross, who served with the PPCLI in Sicily and Italy, was drawn out of Italy through Operation Goldflake, taken up into Holland, where he captured a German officer who looked at him and said, "You know, what are you doing here? I thought you were, the PPCLI were still in Italy." I think his comment was something along the lines of, "The joke's on you," but quite effectively, the three infantry brigades moved themselves across the Mediterranean. And in this particular set of orders, the OIC troops, which happened to be my father for this LST, landing ship tank, moved 2 companies of RCR, the Elgin Regiment, the so-called Tank Transport Regiment, 3 squadrons of armor, and a number of headquarters staff from Leghorn in Italy over to Marseille. And if I move on to the next slide, you'll get an idea of how the move occurred once they got from Leghorn in Italy to Marseille. And they immediately went one of 2 ways. The armor, of course, went on rail. The infantry went by vehicle through a number of staging points. The amount of coordination that went into this particular, and given that it obviously had to be done in the strictest secrecy, but the coordination to ensure that the gas, the rations, the bivouac areas were properly prepared was extraordinary, and it was even more extraordinary given that the first area of operation, or area that they were operating within, was an American sector. And so all of the lodging and accommodation, as such as it was provided by Americans, including the logistical support. And then as they moved up, and they moved through different lines, and anybody that's been involved with the passage of lines, as complicated as that, can appreciate just what the scope of it would have been. The net result is that they ended up in Belgium, and then further up towards Antwerp. As it happens, at about that time, that's when the Germans were beginning to use V2 and V1 rockets to target Antwerp. And terrific casualties were taken by the civilian population, and a number of military personnel were also injured as a result of the attacks. But the RCR, then, the D-Day Dodgers, the ones that had participated in an attack on Brest, despite the poor quality of their equipment, the ones that had landed at Paquino, at what was considered to be the largest combined operations exercise to that date, that had moved all the way up to northern Italy, well north of Ravenna, who had pinned down over 25 divisions, actually 35 when you consider those held in reserve, had taken those casualties and had also suffered the indignity of being called D-Day Dodgers. The division, the 1st Division and the 1st Infantry Brigade that your city, your part of Canada produced, managed to get into the war and was part of the key liberation of Holland, and would have been, had the war not ended as quickly as it did, having cleared up the northern estuaries, which were so vital for shipping, would have then gone into northern Germany. And in fact, maybe as part of the end of this story, I can tell you that my father did go into northern Germany on occupation. When the war ended, he found himself in the Canadian Forces Army of Occupation in Kiel, actually in a city called Zettel, which was responsible for both Bremerhaven and Wilhelmshaven, and some attention to Kiel. So that's where the Canadian troops found themselves in 1945 and stayed there until 1946, until they managed to get back to England and then ultimately to Canada. think it's important to identify that just like Sicily and Italy, the RCR and all of the 1st Canadian Infantry Brigade left a number of graves in Holland. Rather interesting, if you'll notice the Gothic crosses that are behind the plain white crosses. In this particular cemetery, they were intermixed between the German casualties of RCMI and our own. Well, thank you. I wanted to.
I think it's worth knowing, my father was over there as chief signals officer, and he was quite forward before one of the attacks at Ortona every summer. And he said he was watching the RCRs go up. He said it was raining, it was muddy, and they were up to their knees in water, and they had to stick on the highway because the verges hadn't been swept for mines. And they were going out on patrol in the rain, pouring rain, up to their knees in water, going forward to fight. And it was the RCRs that were doing it. Because that was the kind of thing they faced in the winter weather.
Well, you know, one of the things that you discover when you read through the histories is that that kind of bravery wasn't unique to the RCR. Each of the units, the Hastings and Prince Edward Regiment, some of the extraordinary accomplishments that they and assaults that they put in were remarkable. The casualties that they took. And you don't need me to read you those histories, but I would encourage you to get to each of the units regiment histories. The same as the 48. And then, of course, the Van Dudes. Then the marker. The marker that was next to Billy Pope's marker was a Van Dude, but I couldn't make out the name. And I went through the entire list of those that had died in Sicily and Italy, looking for all the Van Dudes who I could match the name. I couldn't find it. But what I realized was doing the search just on Van Du is the number of men that they lost. And when you read about Paul Friquet's bravery and how he won the BC, the words really don't. I mean, some of the official histories provide a little insight, but words really don't describe the extraordinary bravery he and his troops at that time. So yes, thank you for the RCR, but I think every one of the units did some extraordinary things. And you know, I can talk about the infantry. I can't address signals, and I can't address the armored corps, and I can't address the artillery. But clearly, what they had to deal with, particularly the accuracy of the artillery, was extraordinary, despite a number of occasional complaints. The Signals Corps, one of the things that they mention in the after action report, and this is by the War Department, is folks have forgotten that back then everything was wired. There was very little wireless, and what there was could be easily monitored or blocked. And the Germans had the capability to rapidly change frequencies on the receivers to intercept. And the problem with wire is the cost. And so units had objectives of actually recovering wire as they went, as they moved forward. And if you think about the amount and the potential, even if you withdraw half a kilometer, all that wire now has to be essentially cut so that it can't be monitored. So maintaining signals, which is the only way command and control can really occur, is extraordinary. Colonel Crowe was killed because he had lost communication with his forward companies. He went forward to make contact. So yeah, you can't, even the non-combat arms have an extraordinary task and challenge, and were exposed as well.
And the Germans tended to be in higher positions that were nearly always under observation, sometimes too far to fire either. But they were nearly always being watched.
That's the advantage of being the defender. You get to pick your ground. You force your enemy to take the ground confidently. So you're right, you're in observation.
Well, Adrian, I would like to thank you so much for your very personal and especially informative presentation. You told us, and especially me, much that I've never heard before. And we and you will forever treasure the memories of your dad's very significant actions for Canada and the Allies during his time both in Italy and in the rest of Europe. With the D-Day Dodgers, that affectionate name, they have a personal influence in my life as well, because the first motorized vehicle that ever reached my grandparents' mountaintop town in Italy was that of the liberators finally freeing them from the repression that the Nazis had subjected them to over all those years. So you can see why the D-Day Dodgers means a lot to the Falcone family. So thank you so much for taking the time to gather all this fascinating information and presenting it so effectively and so beautifully. All our thanks.
And my thanks added, and we're all to that. Thank you, Adrian. One of the little traditions is to recognize the units from the Canadian side of the Italian campaign who have a representation here tonight. Not the actual people so much anymore, although that was true once upon a time. The little group of us that are the committee got this thrown to us by Brigadier Ted Brown at age 102, who said, I don't think I can do this anymore. And what do you say? Well, 102-year-old, okay, Ted, we'll do it. And so we're going to hope to carry it on with all of your cooperation. So here are the Navy, of course, part of it. The Royal Canadian Artillery is here, and Jim Hubble wanted to point out that the current 7th Toronto Regiment of the Artillery contains the 9th Battery and the 15th Battery, still active, but they were part of the artillery force in the Italian campaign. The Royal Canadian Dragoons, the Governor General's Horse Guards, the 48th Highlanders of Canada, the Royal Canadian Army Service Corps, then, right? And have I missed any unit that
First Special Service Force, Myra's brother was with the First
Right.
Special Service Force.
correct, and I mentioned Charlie, so we certainly do. Anyone else?
Well, it was with the Loyal Edmonton.
The Royal Edmonton Regiment. Thank you. Okay. In that case, Gino, are you?
There's one back there.
Sorry?
Another regiment back there.
10 Corps Lawrence Scots. The Lawrence Scots.
The Lawrence Scots, right? Thank you. So also the closing thing, the D-Day Dodgers in protest, and that included the Brits as well, wrote this song that to the tune of Lily Marlene, which our musician extraordinaire will lead us in. So a little sing song always ends this. Okay.
Oh, you're all in tune. My chiropractor won't let me lift my 45-pound accordion right now, so this is a good starting note. Are you ready? Are you in tune? We are the D-Day Dodgers out in Italy, always on the vino, always on the spree. 8th Army skivers and their tanks, we go to war in ties and slacks. We are the D-Day Dodgers in sunny Italy. holy. Do-do-do-do-do. We fought into a tear, a holiday with pay. Jerry brought his bands up to cheer us on our way. Showed us the sights and gave us tea. We all sang songs, the beer was free. We are the D-Day Dodgers in sunny Italy. The Moorland Casino were taken in our stride. We didn't really fight there, we went there for the ride. Sleeping till noon and playing games. We live in Rome with lots of dames. We are the D-Day Dodgers in sunny Italy. On our way to Florence, we had a lovely time. We drove a bus from Rimini to the Gothic line. Then to Bologna we did go. We all went swimming in the Po. We are the D-Day Dodgers in sunny Italy. Dearest Lady Astor, you think you're mighty hot, standing on the platform talking Tommy Rot. Dear England, sweetheart, and her pride, we think your mouth is much too wide. From all the D-Day Dodgers in sunny Italy. Look around the mountains in the mud and rain. You'll find scattered crosses, some which bear no name. Heartbreak and toil and suffering gone, the boys beneath them slumber on, for they're the D-Day Dodgers who stayed in Italy.
This has been another in the series of podcasts produced by the Royal Canadian Military Institute in Toronto as a public educational service. You can find notices of upcoming events and links to our webcast archives on our website at www.rcmi.org. On behalf of the Institute, this is Eric Morse saying please subscribe to our YouTube channel and thank you for listening.